Good evening, everyone. We're so glad that you can make it tonight. We want this to be as informal as possible. So if you would please sit wherever you would like. And we're about to open up the buffet line. And we think it would be appropriate if we would all follow the Livingston family and the Edmondson family through line. So if their table, including Ms. Mixon, would like to go on through, and Pam, and please help yourself. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. David Livingston, our first band director. And we should also mention that the first choir director of Franklin County High School is also here. That's, of course, his wife, Joyce. Joyce Livingston, the first choir director of Franklin County High School. Our second director and the second inductee into our Hall of Fame was the worldwide, well-known, well-reputed, and many other things, and also my good friend. It's so good to see you, Mr. John Edmondson. The third band director in our proud history was, of course, Clayton Fugate, and in honor of Clayton's memory, his passing, and his career, and all that he meant to all of us, to those who were lucky enough to have been in his band, to have dealt with him directly, and for those like my current students who, whether they know it or not, have so much benefit in their lives because of his hard work. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Clayton Fugate.
They loved him. You could tell he cared so much about the band, not just music and kids. It was the band. Everything, you got to do it for the band, and kids related to that. They still do. That's his legacy to me.
He loved the kids, loved everyone like they were his own. They were his kids.
And he had a long-standing reputation and career at Frankfort High as always having a good band. Always good. They always looked good in the parades, and just had a lot of pride.
a great teacher and a great friend, Mr. Clayton Fugate. Mr. Fugate is now the third inductee into the Flyer Band Hall of Fame, as he should be. Our next inductee is a good friend of mine, and hence he's expecting me to say very ornery things, things that only I know and only would tell. However, I'm not. I'm going to leave that to Tommy Johns, who is going to introduce our next inductee. A brief bio: he was our head band director from the early 70s through 1985. His total career spanned from 1968 to 1985. How many of you here today at some point played in a band directed by Tom Broner? By a show of hands? It's quite a quorum, Mr. Broner. Ladies and gentlemen, also a former band director of the Flyer Band, Mr. Tom Johns.
I didn't know it was going to be this formal. As I watched the tribute there, I was reminded of something. First of all, I graduated the class of 1966. And as it turns out, that's the only class that had David Livingston, John Edmondson, and Clayton Fugate as band directors. So that was quite an honor and quite a privilege. Back then, which was a horribly long time ago, over 45 years actually, I was Tommy Johns, and I had a good friend, and he was Tommy Broner. We were Tommies back then, and we've spent the rest of our life trying to be Tom, and most of the people we know won't let us do that. And so I want to tell those of you who may not be as old as me, and that's just about every one of you, what it was like. I grew up on Sunset Drive in East Frankfort, and if you went up to the far end of the street and turned left and you went a few houses, that's where he lived. We were that close. We played basketball together, we played football together, we played music together. And he was a very good trumpet player, and he had great tutelage with Dave Livingston and John Edmondson. And when he graduated, Dave had gone to Ohio State, and he was compelled to go up and study with him, and he did. And that's where he got kind of messed up on football, actually. And if you know him at all, you know he's still not over it. So we forgive him for that. And then when he graduated, he came back, and by then Clayton Fugate was the band director, and Clayton and some others kind of arm twisted him to take this job to be Clayton's assistant, and he did. And then after a while, they switched roles. Clayton went to the junior highs and elementaries and whatever, and Tom took over the high school. And the first year of that was when I was his assistant. And then I'd probably still be doing all that, except John Edmondson gave me a call one day and gave me my opportunity to get into the music publishing business, which I've been trying to get out of ever since. But so that's why I didn't stay as long as I could have. Now that was the short version. There were bumps in the road for Tom. If you're our age, you know what it was like to go through the mid to late 60s. There was a thing called the Vietnam War, and there was a thing called the draft. And it changed the course of a lot of young men's lives, and Tom was one of them. And so he ended up, he didn't do everything exactly the way he wanted to. He ended up going to grad school at UK for a while. He ended up, he taught at Kentucky State for a while. He got in the National Guard band and was a true embarrassment to the uniform. I want you to know that. Yeah. I met him in Louisville one time that the National Guard band was playing in the Derby parade. And he was so sloppy that they made him hide in the middle of the band. They said, you can play, but you cannot be seen. So he kind of missed the whole military thing there. But he did it. And the rest of it, well, first of all, I want to say there's 2 or 3 halls of fame that he can't ever be in, if you know him. One of them would be like Handyman. Have you ever seen him with like a pair of pliers in his hand? That's a bad thing right there. And of course, you've seen him with a golf club in his hand. He's not going to make that Hall of Fame either. But he makes the Friend Hall of Fame, I'll tell you that. And he makes the Teacher Hall of Fame. And one of the things that I've noticed about him through the years, having actually taught my daughter in summer camps and stuff, he makes it fun. He makes you work. And when you get to the end of the year, you learn something and you never even knew you were trying. And the next year, you learned even more. Fun and hard work. And that's the way he did it. And I'm proud to nominate him for the Hall of Fame, Franklin County Flyer Band.
Mr. Tom Broner.
Wow, he's good, isn't he? Yeah. Old best friends are just the best friends right there, I tell you. Well, this is unbelievable. I didn't see this coming until just very recently, so I just happen to have a few. Made a few notes here. Oh gosh. I look back to high school and even before that, and my mentors, and the reason I'm in this, whatever this is, this field, 2 of which are sitting right here. I always wanted to be a band director, and I always thought, man, if I could just be like them. And I am, except that I don't have near the talent these 2 guys did. You don't realize that no other band, or very few other bands, can you be in, and the band directors write all the music for marching band. And these guys did. And we had no idea. I mean, we just thought that's the way it was. And when I got to be band director, I tried. And, it's just kind of what you do. And it made it very personal. When it comes to talent, I don't know of anybody with more talent than these 2 guys. And, I'm going to throw other mentors in there like Bob Wills and Clayton Fugit and Larry Harris and a few people like that. And I will always be grateful. When you're lucky enough to do something that, I don't know, I think I was put on the earth to do this. And they showed me that. Thank you. Gosh, I remember high school kind of vaguely, and I remember that our band was good, and I never knew why. I got this mental picture of Dave Livingston standing up there, and I'm playing trumpet, and I'm taking stuff up an octave, or messing around on it and doing it. He'd take just about all he could take, and about once every 2 or 3 months, he'd stop the band, he'd look over, and he'd say, "Tommy, damn it." And that's all it took. You remember doing that? That's all it took. So I'd be good for about another month or 2. I was in band, of course, with Tommy Johns. We were a little Dixieland band. I was in band with some of your older brothers and sisters out there, and I don't know, it was a great time, just an amazing time. One person that's here tonight that was the only trumpet player. When I went in there as a freshman, about halfway through the year, I got first chair, and it was a matter of pride for me, and I was the only guy practicing probably, and they didn't like me. I don't know why. I mean, I really don't, because I was always fun, and but they would take their mouthpieces and they would hit me with them during rehearsal. And there was only one person in the trumpet section that was even cordial and nice to me, and that was Billy Bushwald, and I appreciate that. Billy Bushwald back there. Stand up, Billy. Stand up. Yeah. He's still a good trumpet player. He introduced me to the Haydn Trumpet Concerto, and I don't know whether you remember that, but you did. You said, this is a good song. Why don't you play this next year? And he's still playing well. I really appreciate it every time he comes to a function or a community band, because he's the only guy in the room older than me. And I like that. Of course, I don't have to worry about that now, do I? I learned my humor and my musicianship, and I got inspired by these guys. The best two sense of humors in the world, maybe. And Dave's, of course, is at either a lower level than mine, and John's is at an even higher level than anybody you know. But I value their friendship a lot. Oh, golly. The FCHS band got better every year. You know, I came back to town after Ohio State thinking that I'm going to go someplace and be a band director or something. I got an orchestra job in Indiana for $2,000 more than they offered me here in Frankfurt. And I was going to take that, and Larry Harris called and said, you got to take this job. And Larry was just leaving it. And Clayton Fugate called and said, you got to take this job. You're from Ohio State, and we want you to come back home. And I still wasn't going to do it. And George Hurst called, and you know about George Hurst, most of you. He was kind of our godfather. And mine too. He sold me my trumpet out of the trunk of his car when I was in the 5th grade. True story. You remember he went around to everybody, he worked for Shackleton's and pulled that out. He said, you have to take the job. He didn't say you should. He said, you have to take it. And thank God he did. It was a great run, unbelievable. The band got better every year. And, you know, I worked with some amazing people. Rick Moreno, the best teacher in 50 states. Rick Greenwood, an intuitive musician like you wouldn't believe. And those guys were my assistants, and you know, it should have been the other way around maybe. But what a team. We had such great fun, and we made such great music. And as important as that was, and all the administrative support and everything else, you know, when the town of Frankfurt got behind us, as important as all that was, the most important ingredient in this phenomenon known as the flyer band were the students. Year in and year out, we had great students. People that were smart and talented and funny and cocky and ornery and social and just... And I told the band today, the alumni band today, that I had to bring a chair and a whip into the rehearsal every day just to kind of, you know, stay in front of them and keep things going. But they challenged me, and they inspired me, and I've made a lot of good music since then. 24 years, we just figured it up. 24 years since I left that job. And I left that job to go to a college job in Illinois, and I had 8 years of college teaching, and I had some great students, and we made great music. And I've got a band now in Scott County that does really well. It's almost like a mirror image of the Franklin County program, but there's something missing, and that is magic. there has never been, that I know of, a band program like this one. And I've never been able to find that magic that we had in performances and rehearsals and caring. And I think a lot of that comes from just hard damn work. You know, we just worked harder than everybody else. 3 nights a week for marching band on a game night, and whatever it took to memorize the music, and sectionals and basketball games and extra rehearsals and private teachers, and I mean the whole thing just worked. It was an amazing phenomenon. One of the best things about, maybe the only great thing about leaving here, was I went to Illinois and I found a beautiful, talented, caring woman to marry me. And I've always been grateful for that, Elaine Broner, in Illinois. It's hard to find a woman that's a musician and can understand, you know, all the stuff you go through and the time that it takes, but I do appreciate that. I have 2 great kids. One of them is my assistant, and the other is in Washington, D.C., trying to save the world. And I really appreciate those guys like you wouldn't believe. We have 5 grandkids. Christmas is an expensive proposition. Anyway, the 17 years that I spent at Franklin County have never been duplicated in my life in its own way of magic. And I'll always feel like that is the most important time that I spent professionally in my life. And I do appreciate this honor more than you will ever realize. Thank you. One other thing, just a little footnote. Did you like the accompaniment to that video? Do you know who that was? It wasn't an arrangement. That was Dave Shelton sitting at the piano playing Fantasy on the music that Dave Livingston wrote. And he didn't tell me that, but I'll guarantee you was that an artistic video and a beautiful, beautiful performance. Thank you.
I know that the only way I'll ever get that 20 back is by winning it on the golf course. And for those, unless I'm teamed up with Hunt Butler, it's never going to happen. So Hunt, you got to come back out with this. Those years were magic, and it is those years which the current band staff is trying to recapture. And we're going to try to recapture it the same way, by a love for the music and a love for the kids, and by working harder than anyone else. And they set the standard, and as Tom intimated, he didn't do it alone. Those 3 band directors, those were a wonder team. And we can't induct one without inducting all 3 of them, because they were a set. You had the ball coach, and I mean that as a compliment, and you know that I do. You had the pedagogue and Rick Moreno, who could take any kid, no matter how messed up, and they'd come out of the practice room 20 minutes later, they'd be fixed and they'd be happy about it. And you had Rick Greenwood, who inspires all of us with his musicianship and his beauty as a person. And so the next person that we're going to get to talk about is Rick Moreno. When I took the job here, the first thing I did is call Rick and say, Rick, you're unretired. Shave. And when I told Rick that he was going to be inducted into our Hall of Fame tonight, I asked him, who would you like to introduce you? And he thought for a while, and he said, I think it's got to be Tom. And I said, well, sure, that's an obvious choice, but Tom is also going to be inducted. So, could you think about it, maybe pick someone else? He said, all right, I'll try. And I called him the next night. Rick, have you thought about it? Yes, I have. Who would you like to induct you? Well, I really think it should be Tom. And Angela will back me up on this. I don't know if any of you have ever had the pleasure of arguing with Rick Moreno. But to introduce his friend, would you please welcome back to the podium, Tom.
So I have to be really careful about this because there are so many stories I could tell, and there are so many things. You know, we as friends and colleagues, and we've been friends forever. I met Rick, and Tom Johns can verify this. I met him when I started back to graduate school at UK, and this was back in 1970, I guess, something like that. 70, it was 1970, and he was in the trombone section at UK, and he and Chuck Sale, who's, I don't know whether he's here tonight, but he was at the rehearsal, and Tom Johns were in the trombone section. And, you know, they were the orneriest three guys you ever met in your life. And I immediately gravitated towards them. They did things to each other and to people that were just unspeakable. You'd be sitting in the trombone section and you'd look the other way and you'd get back and there'd be a booger in your mouthpiece. And this was the environment in which spawned this wonderful, wonderful musician. As soon as Tommy left, that was the first person I called, and he was in Akron working on a master's. He'd already graduated, and he'd taught a half year in Georgetown, and then went to Akron to study with a really good trombone teacher up there, and found out that there were a lot of Yankees up there. So fortunately he decided that he might want to come back, and we talked to him about coming back. And I remember him coming in for the interview, and Fugit was still the supervisor of music and kind of the head honcho, but this was my buddy and this was my friend, and I wanted him to get back in here and be part of our team. So Fugit asked him 2 or 3 questions. One, do you like to fish? And I don't know, a couple of other real technical questions that you have to have experience in to be a good band director. And he passed the test, and we talked him into coming, and he hit the ground running. And I think we both learned a lot from Clayton Fugit on how to teach. But he took all these Fugitisms and to another degree. And you know, we have always said that Clayton Fugit could walk into a room and come out, you know, an hour later, and everybody'd have a good embouchure. Well, you know, Rick has taken that to a high science. And he is, like, you know, Dave said it nice in terms of pedagogy, but he is literally a born teacher and one of the most incredible teachers. Just has the ability to get a point across and the ability to get something technical across to someone in a very non-technical way. And that, of course, is one of the great gifts of being a teacher. He's also another one of my best friends, and an old best friend. And like I said before, best friends are the greatest. And you can always depend on this guy in a lot of ways. And a lot of students have looked up to him over the years, and a lot of teachers have looked up to him over the years. The biggest disappointment was when they built this stinking high school on the other side of town and took my assistant and shipped him over to Western Hills. And so I don't know, that was a very big disappointment, but he did a great job over there too. But this man is a teacher and a musician and a friend and a lot more, and it's my honor to introduce Rick Moreno as the latest recipient in the Hall of Fame here at Flyer Band. Rick, come up here.
Well, I have to correct Tom on a couple of things. First of all, I have hit the ground. Hardly ever running, though. I went to UK, and the first person I met was Brian Gorell. So, band camp, freshman year. I hooked up with Brian, and Tommy was in the trombone section. So, I kept hearing about all these people from Franklin County. And I'd look around the band, and I said, where's that guy from? Oh, the first chair trumpet, he's from Franklin County. So, I started hearing about Franklin County, all this. And the other shaving joke, and it's not really a joke, is that I was fed up in Akron. When a New York Italian can be fed up because it's too far north, that's saying something. Akron is the only city in the world where it rains. They make tires, and it snowed. The snow is black in Akron. But I was kind of fed up. There was a kind of a Nazi trumpet teacher up there that was having people do things like hang their trumpet from the ceiling with a string and try to play it with no pressure. And the place was crazy. And so I called Tom one night and said, it's not a lot of fun up here. And he says, do you want a job? I said, well, yeah. Where? And he said, well, John's is leaving. And I said, he said, you got to come down tomorrow. He said, first you got to get a haircut, and then you got to shave. Which leads me in, I feel like nobody's told one yet, so I might as well tell a joke. Do you know why all Italian men wear gold chains? So we know where to stop shaving. And I could tell a lot of stories, and I'm really only going to tell one. I'm going to indicate a few key words of a couple others about Tom, and not Tom, wherever Tom is. But the funniest one, I think, of their high school tenure was they had girlfriends picked out on the band trip, and they stopped somewhere to eat or something, and it wasn't dark enough yet. So they climbed a hill and hid for several hours so it would be dark enough on the bus on the way home. And then I can tell a story, actually two stories about Tom. I could. I'm not going to tell them, but both stories involved a shotgun. One in his hand and one in someone else's. I can also tell you that I threw him out of my house one night because he almost broke my phone. Because he was trying to get me to be a bus driver. I don't think I would have passed the physical, really. But I was in I will call it a foreign band room the other day. And the teacher was up there teaching. And it was noisy. And the kids weren't learning anything. And it kind of reminded me of Clayton's rehearsals, except for it was chaos in his rehearsal sometimes. And you'd walk in, and he'd kind of stop and do something, and then it was better. And it was all I could do. I really literally had to bite my tongue. Not to say, can I show these trumpets something? Because the magic that we had was no matter who was on the podium, we were free to interrupt in any manner. Whether it was, hey, what are you doing? Spit that gum out, or whether it was, come here and we'll fix that, or Tom, do you think maybe we ought to put a crescendo there? And we were accused of being kind of ornery and crazy. And most of the other band directors, we'd go to these festivals and these guys would be talking about marching band and marching band and marching band. And we'd walk in on their meeting where they'd have the lights out visualizing their marching show. And, we'd all have our underwear on our head or something. And I think part of it is the students always saw that we had fun doing what they were doing. They always saw us playing our horns, and hopefully that inspired them to practice. Sometimes I think maybe they thought, gosh, those guys ought to sound better than that. But I do agree with Tom that the real magic has come from the students. And it's kind of like being a granddad. These people that don't know you. Well, usually you know your sons and daughters, but they give you their children, and you mess with them for an hour a day, and then you send them home. Don't have to do anything. But another special thing that's different with band is most of you that I see out there. I taught for 6 years at least. I was there the first day Brad Chase put a trombone on his face. I was there the day that Mark Hughes was going to knock me out and perform this procedure, and I wasn't sure I was comfortable with a tuba player doing it. And I'm not sure that I always wanted to be a band director. I wanted to be a trombone player, and I went to Akron and studied. We had a trombone choir that used to play at, you might know about Rex's Roundhouse. Rex Humbard was an evangelist, and he raised millions of dollars. And we used to always play there and get paid for it. And, there was a guy that worked in the tire factory. His name was Martin Curtis. He was a bass trombone player. And he'd come to rehearsal and, get the tire dust off his hands and get his horn out and just play circles around me. And so I'd had a little experience teaching in Georgetown, and I really didn't like Akron. I had no idea what I was getting into when I came down here to Franklin County. And it's been a great experience. I did turn to the dark side. And the real truth about Western Hills is Greenwood and I did not fight for the job. We fought over who was not going to get to take it. Neither one of us really wanted the job because I was going to be smart enough never to be a high school band director and just do what I like the most, which is the little kids. And I thank Dave for keeping me involved. He knows I'm kind of ornery, and when I do say no, that I mean it. He tried to. How many times did you try to get me to conduct on this concert? 29. He tried again yesterday. 30. But it's been great, and it's great to see all of you. Luckily, I get to see a lot of you often, and I'm teaching some of your students, your children now. So it's been great. I've had a great time, and it's kind of like a bad habit. I can't quit. I've taught with Dave. Everywhere Dave goes and teaches, he has a habit of not staying places very long. I'm not sure why, but he always seems to find something for me to do and some money to pay me, and I appreciate that, and I'm honored to be a part of this legacy. Thank you.
Well, the truth is that people learn all of my jokes, and it takes about 2 years, and so it's time to move on. I tell you what, though, I and Mr. Whitecamp, and now that Mr. Moreno is back with us every day, are absolutely in love with this tradition, and that's why we want to preserve it, why we want to celebrate it. And I promise you this, I'm not leaving this job until I die or you all make me. So I found a place to stay. Thank you. Well, now I've only been here 8 months. You may want to hold your applause for a year and see how it goes. The third member of, I probably shouldn't tell this, there was a band director in town, and in retrospect, I suspect that this individual may have been a bit jealous of their success. And this competing band director referred to the two who have just been here and the one of whom we're about to speak as the Holy Trinity. And except I'm not convinced that this person meant that nicely. But we're assuming that Tom is God, just because it seems to fit. And we'll leave it to Rick and Rick to decide who's Jesus and the Holy Ghost. I probably shouldn't have told that. I apologize. The third member of the Holy Trinity couldn't be with us tonight. He's a celebrated conductor. He has most recently been the director of bands at University of Central Florida. And for those of you who don't make it to University of Central Florida, if you're not a Floridian, John, you'll excuse the rest of us, John and Joyce. He did an amazing job there. He does an amazing job everywhere he does. And one of the things which all of us share in common is that if you ask anyone of us, our circle of friends, who is the best conductor you know, we can't talk for very long without discussing Dr. Rick Greenwood. And unfortunately, he couldn't be here tonight, and he hates it so much the more than even I that he couldn't make it, but he's booked. I believe he's conducting an all-state band in Indiana, I believe is what he told me. And so to accept his induction on his behalf is another former band director of the Flyer Band. Would you please welcome Mr. Paul Weiler.
Well, as most of you all know, I'm dangerous when I have a microphone in front of me. And the good news is I won't speak very much on this because I really will be damaged if I try to use stuff. I just want you all to appreciate, you already have so far, the wonderful work that's been done here for all of these great musicians right in front of us. And I can't say a thing to increase the knowledge that you all have just used for us. And I hope that somebody else can tell us more about Rick Greenwood for us. Do you have a film for us? Oh, really? That'll take care of it. So I'm going to step aside and get our accolades for Rick while we can move on. Thank you all very much. Are we doing anything for him?
Where do you start with Rick Greenwood? He student taught with us and was probably the most talented, best student teacher we ever had. He was also the craziest one. Fugit decided to retire, and Greenwood was the student teacher, so he was the heir apparent to one of the most important jobs in music education in the state, feeding the Flyer Band. And he took over and did a great job. When Western Hills was built, we neither one really wanted to do the job because we both wanted to do middle school. And I lost, so I got the job. And Rick actually did Elkhorn and Bondurant at the same time, took both bands to festival, and of course got wins. And he's just an incredible musician. Good trombone player. I remember first meeting him at some kind of summer thing at UK, and he had long hair and was kind of jive, and we started playing trombone together, and we swapped a few ideas, and we both got better that day. And that was the beginning of a long relationship. And no one really had an ego that prevented that. we had such a respect for each other musically and personally.
So Rick's a pretty good burper.
We had no defined roles. We did what we felt needed to be done. Rick and I would stand in the back and listen to the band and pull somebody out and teach them a fingering or show them a phrase, and it was just a real sharing musically. Nobody was really ever in charge. Anybody could step on the podium at any given time and say, "Give me that stick. Let me do something here." And that's a very rare thing. Most guys are very protective of their podium. We didn't care. We just shared it. He used to travel with me to Bridgeport and Bald Knob and Collins Lane, and I would find half-eaten hot dogs under the seat of my Volkswagen. Thanks to Rick. But the best thing about Rick was that he's just a natural musician. He just gets it, and I'll never forget, we were in Chicago. Greenwood, Tom Broner, me, I think Pat Duncan was there too, eating pizza, and a roach ran across the table. And we decided, that was right after George Hurst had died, and we decided George sent the roach so we wouldn't have to pay for our meal. And everybody quit eating except for Rick and I. And we said, well, we've had enough bologna sandwiches with nightcrawler juice on our hands that this shouldn't bother us, so we finished our meal. But he's a great musician, a great person, loves kids, just super intellect, great conductor, great guy. Loved the kids loved him.
So that provides us with a natural segue. We have a few chairs set up in the front, and we thought it would be a nice way to end our time together by inviting all former directors who would like to come forward, and we're going to have a discussion panel of sorts. Now, for those of you who are not musicians, when it comes to band directors, what a discussion panel is, it's lies. It's all stories, it's jokes, and it's lies. But it'll be entertaining, and if you wouldn't mind, this will take us a few minutes to get set, so if you'd like to refill your glasses or grab an extra dessert, this would probably be a good opportunity. But we invite all of our former directors to the front, please. These gentlemen don't need an introduction, but for the sake of the video and formality, from your right to left, we have Dr. David Livingston. John Edmondson. Tom Broner. Rick Moreno. And Tom Johns. The original intent was for me to MC of sorts, but for two reasons. Number one, I am no Johnny Carson. And number two, because I don't think these five gentlemen need me in the way. We're going to let them talk and share stories, and if you have something to say, feel free to pitch in. And I think Tom Johns wanted to go first, and we're going to allow that. Mr. Johns.
Okay, this was my first memorable experience in the Franklin County Band. I was a freshman, and we were on a bus going somewhere. It wasn't an overnight trip. I think it was an away football game or something. And Tom and I were in the seat behind Mr. Livingston at that time. He was Mr. Livingston. And I was a freshman. He was the guy who started me in the 5th grade. I kind of had him really high on a pedestal. And he turned around and he looked back and he said, "So, Tommy," he said, "you got any dirty pictures of your girlfriend?" Kind of looked back. I said, "No." He said, You want to buy some? That's when I found out band could be fun.
Speaking of pictures, you know how when you reach into your wallet, I got pictures of my grandkids in my wallet right now, and I remember standing around at social events and things, later as a colleague at conventions and things with Dave Livingston, and everybody would be showing pictures of their family. And he'd reach into his wallet, and I don't know whether you ever knew this, Pam, but he had pictures of you and Timmy in there. and of course, they weren't Timmy and Pam. They were these gnarled up kind of creatures. I'm not even sure they were people. The ugliest things you ever saw in your life. And David would be, you know, he'd have it out and he'd be smiling and the people would be looking at it, not knowing how to react, you know. And he wouldn't let them up. He just kept on looking, and there's Timmy, and he plays, and Pam plays oboe, and just went on and on. And he loved doing stuff like that to people. Enjoyed it. He had all kinds of cards. He'd pull out a card and show you a card, and when you read it, your face would immediately turn red. And I can't tell you what that said on it, but I mean, he took silliness seriously to a new art, and it was something to emulate and to try to live up to. I mean, musically it was hard enough, but I mean, if I ever told a stupid joke in band, and I've heard that I've had, now I don't really remember that. But if I've ever told a stupid joke in band, it's his fault. This guy right there in the yellow jacket.
I can tell the clean version of the little card he used to have.
I was easy on you. I was easy on you. Listen to this.
But it said something like, "Hi there, any chance that we might," I'll just go ahead and say it, "crawl in the sack tonight?" And after it gave a description of his abilities as maybe not being quite what they once were, but once they were good once. And then the last line of the card, it says, you don't need to answer, just smile. I kept one of those cards in my wallet for years. It never worked. They didn't even smile.
I've got to tell you how I ended up in Franklin County. I was a composition major at UK without a job, and we had a reading band, jazz band, get together one night, just reading some charts that we had around, I think, Pete Conley and maybe some others. And this strange-looking guy came up to me afterward, and he said, I kind of like your writing. He said, you got a job? And I said, as a matter of fact, I don't. He said, well, I need a music teacher. And I said, what kind of a music teacher? And he said, well, general music and a middle school out at Peaks Mill. And I said, what's Peaks Mill? And he said, well, it's out about 15 miles from town. Yeah. I since found out that, at least when I was there, I don't think anybody from Peaks Mill ever came to the Franklin County High Band. They never made it to high school. But anyway, and I take full credit for that. But I said, yeah, I'm interested. I said, but I must tell you, I have no expertise in teaching elementary music. And he said, well, you play piano, don't you? And I said, well, I play a little bit, a Ranger's piano. And he said, that's all. You just need sing some songs, bring them in. Well, those were memorable years because the room that we had was in Thornhill School, and there was one window that opened inward to the casement, but it didn't quite open enough to get any air in the room. And and it was about the size of this table, but we had 30 kids come in there, elementary kids, and everybody got an hour of music a week, either 3 20-minute periods or 2 half-hour periods. And it was a revelation to me, teaching that grade level. But to maintain my sanity, I got to go out to Peaks Mill a day and a half a week to teach band, and that's where I really started writing for kids, because my first band at Peaks Mill consisted of, if I can remember this now, 2 flutes, 4 clarinets, 2 alto saxes, and 9 trumpets. And that was it. I had no low brass, low percussion or anything. And I would say something to Dave like, can I get any drums or something, Well, they had a budget of about $500 for the whole county music system at that time, if you remember. And so that was my induction into teaching, but I did like it. And fortunately, after 2 years of that, I moved up to Elkhorn Middle School, which was a totally different situation. At that time, it was one of the largest in the state, I think. And a friend of mine had just left, Bill Woodworth. And I did that for a year in Peaks Mill, and I thought I was in heaven because it was easy, and helped at the high school with Dave. Well, one dark summer night, Dave pulled up stakes and went to Columbus, Ohio, without telling anybody, and to get his doctorate at Ohio State. And right away, I get a call from Roy Bondurant, and he says, "We need a high school band director." And I said, "Oh no!" I said, "I'm not going to follow that guy." I said the kids loved him. And I said, "I've seen him work." I said, "I have no desire to ever be a high school band director. It's foreign to me." But I was sort of coerced into it. About 2 weeks before school started, I relented and said, "Okay, well, I'll take the job." I didn't have another job to go to anyway. And
now you tell me.
But it was a revelation, and that was the same year we went from like double C or 3C to B or double B or something like that. So we got bumped up and I had no sense at all about high school band.
No what?
We did things like Chester Overture and variations on a shaker melody, and I didn't know any better, But I had the horses to do it. I had Broner on first trumpet that first year, and I had Tom Johns, I had Charlie Barrett on oboe, and some outstanding players to cover all those solo parts in Shaker Melody. And I learned, and I hope they learned something, but the interesting thing about that high school job was I took over with no band camp to learn the simple end zone routine, which is they're probably still using, I guess, right? Yep. They're still maintaining the tradition of being an excellent playing band that can't march, as I understand. Yeah. Well, I inherited that same end zone formation, which I think Dave wrote or designed, where you fed into a block band, you went down to the center of the field and you broke, and you made pictures. And we had like 8 home games that first year, as I recall, and no music. So I'd finish the game on Friday night and go home and start writing for the show next week. And I'd come in Monday and duplicate it on the Xerox machine and cut it up and everybody would pick up their music and we'd work on the music for the next week. And that was like, I guess it's like writing in Hollywood, isn't it? You know? It was a great experience and a great bunch of kids. That sticks in my mind, and key players that were in that band. But I pulled a Dave Livingston and left after 2 years because I had a good friend over in Winchester named Bob Cowan that I'd been gigging with for a number of years that said, "I'm starting a program over here. I need a second band director." And I said, "Do I have to take high school?" And he said, "Well, you come in and help me." He said, "But you won't have to have your own high school band." I've always been a middle school guy, and that's why I ended up writing so much middle school level band music, junior high, middle school. Not so much the upper level stuff. But it was a great experience, and I look back now, and if I hadn't done that, if Hanson hadn't come along and offered me a job, that's another whole story. But he offered me a job, and I pulled up stakes and moved to Miami to work for he was known as the Howard Hughes of the sheet music business. Very interesting. And I coerced this guy into coming down and working with me for a while. But anyway, that writing experience. I thought, well, I just got out of UK. I've got a master's in composition. I'm supposed to be able to do this, so I just did it. But it was great training, and But I've always had in the back of my mind that if I hadn't done that, I'd be retired now as a middle school band director someplace, you know.
Well,
Thank you.
I think he really left town because I was assigned to be his student teacher that next fall. And I ended up going to Tate's Creek, and this was in like 60, probably 70. And of course, they were still calling people into the Army. So Tom gets back from the Army and is at UK, and the middle school band director at Tate's Creek gets drafted, just flat out drafted. So I said, Don Trevette was the band director. I said, Don, Tom Broner's, over at UK and just got back from the Army. He'd be a good hire. And so Tom got that job, and that's where we really first started teaching together.
all right. I'd like to introduce my daughter, Pam Thurman. And this woman here, I don't even know. That's Joyce. I do have a story I do want to tell. Joyce and I, we were up in what's that town up there? Let's see, Indianapolis, and we were coming down to Louisville, and I was driving down, and so we'd get about 15, 20 miles on down, and Joyce would say, honey, it said, it's 75 miles to Louisville. And I said, it's not Louisville, it's Louisville. And so we went on down, and so about halfway on down there, and she said, honey, it's 50 miles to Louisville. I said, no, it's Louisville. So this went on, and finally we did go to Louisville, and we went to a restaurant, and I called the lady over, and I said, ma'am, would you very slowly tell my wife where we are? And the lady said, Burger King. Next.
I had no idea where he's going with it.
All right, well, it's his story. Yeah.
We have up here the origin of a very famous band director term that he used, and he uses, and I use, and I've taken it all over the country. And it has to do with the fingering for F sharp. And how many of you know the expression, is it this'n or this'n? He originated it. He was the one that came up with that first, and I guess it was at Peaks Mill.
It was Peaks Mill, and his name was Penn, and he was a nice kid. He just didn't have a good memory, I guess. But, but after all the pedagogy that I had, I finally figured out that all the band methods teach B flat first in the method book. And it has something to do with the clarinet matching the trumpet book, and they have to learn B flat because they can't learn B natural. I figured that out years later, but he never figured it out. So when you had a piece in the key of F and it was B natural, I'd hear psst, psst. What was his name? David or something like that. I'd say, what? And he said, this'n or this'n? This. True story. Yeah.
Peaks Mill was kind of a funny place to be, and I have two Peaks Mill stories. There was a little kid out there who could play the trumpet. He got a good sound. he could not play the entire line. He could play any 2 measures, any 4 measures. You remember him? His last name was Crabtree.
Oh, Keith Crabtree.
Keith Crabtree. And for 2 years at Peaks Mill, he'd get halfway through, and he'd stop and say, let me start that again. And he'd go on. He ended up being a pretty good trumpet player at the high school. The other was, you see kids bring in all these horns, you know, for 6th grade beginning band. Well, now this was my Aunt Susie's, you know, and you open the case and the stench hits you. And so this kid brought in an old military cornet. It had about 6 different sets of slides. You could play it in the key of C or B flat or E or anything. And so one day he was playing along. He says, something's wrong with my horn. I looked at it, and I couldn't see anything. And I said, what's it doing? He says, well, it just feels like it stopped up or something. And so he'd play. I watched him play, and I heard, and every time he pushed down the 3rd valve, it kind of go, So I said, well, maybe there's something in there. So he pulled the 3rd valve slide off, blew through the horn, and blew a live roach out. Put the slide back in the horn. That's a lot better. There goes the roach. He's happy. Everybody's happy.
I guess you just got to get the bugs out of it. Okay, so Rick was so kind to tell a story about Tom Johns and I and our thwarted attempt at getting a little privacy on the bus ride home, and I appreciate him doing that. I'm also very grateful that none of my present students are here tonight, because if I were a band director and some kid did that now, I'd kill him. And he didn't say that my mother was a chaperone on that trip, and that John Edmondson was the band director, and he was most upset with us. But you know, anything in the name of whatever it was. I'll tell a story about Tom Johns and I, and this was when Dave Livingston was a band director, and we went to the Mountain Laurel Band Festival, or the parade. You remember that? Stayed all night in a motel someplace in eastern Kentucky.
Check, please.
Whoa.
So
What are you going to say?
So in the middle of the night, we stayed up almost all night. We got out of the room like we shouldn't have, and we're going to include Bill Lindsay in this, and Brad New, I don't know, somebody else.
Wait, now you tell me.
Yeah. Well, you knew about it because the next morning we couldn't leave. We had all the buses loaded and ready to leave, and the management of the hotel came out and said, nope, you can't leave because somebody last night threw all of the deck furniture in the pool. And I think, was that your idea? We did that because we thought it was a good idea at the time. So we had to get off the bus and go into the pool and get all the furniture out and put it back on the deck. And that was one of the more benign things that we did in high school. One thing I don't like is I hear all these stories by people like you, and back there I hear all these stories that I didn't know that went on before marching rehearsal and before pep bands and junk like that. And if I had known that, by golly, you'd have been in trouble. Still makes me mad.
I must tell you about my first year teaching. I had Elkhorn. I still had Elkhorn Middle School. And since I took the job so late, the powers that be just arbitrarily put all the sophomore, junior, and senior in one band and all of my incoming freshmen in another band. So I didn't have a chance, to have tryouts and divide up the band the way I wanted to. So I had 3 full bands that year, and it happened to be inauguration year, and we had a new governor. I think it was Breathitt. And I had no assistant director, so I figured this is the way I do. I get some parents to help me herd the kids down in the waiting area, and we were very late. It was a very cold, clear, brisk January day, and almost freezing. And I said, here's what we'll do. I'll go up this Capitol Avenue, and about halfway up, I'll drop out and come back and pick up the Elkhorn Band and come up with them, and then do the same thing with the high school. Well, I went by this mother with a little 4 or 5-year-old boy standing off the street. And there's a swale in the sidewalk. And I caught the little boy's eyes as I walked by, and I waved at him, and he waved back. And a few feet up, I dropped out, and I came back down the street behind him and picked up the Elkhorn Band, and I thought, I got to watch for this kid. And I came by the next time, and I spotted him, and I made sure he saw him. And I waved at him again, and he went kind of. Well, you know what happened the third time? I came by, and he's pulling on his mother's arm. Never forget it. Never forget it. I'll never forget how cold I was that day, too.
We've got just a few minutes. Go ahead, Dr. Livingston, please.
Okay. I never did really whip anybody except one person at the Franklin County Band, and I'm not going to tell you his name, but I did bring him in, and I had one of my students to be, to watch and so forth. And I gave him 10 good ones. I really did. And so that's the only time I've really beat up on anybody. But I had help. I'm not going to tell you who it is.
I'm guessing. I was guessing him.
You were.
I would have guessed him. He's one of them that hit me with his mouthpiece.
I have one that I had to spank that's in this room. That's as far as we'll take that.
We'd hate to embarrass him. Could we at least say his initials? His initials are Chris Conway.
Well, as long as we're talking about spanking, I think I see 2 or 3 people in this. Hi, girls. 8th graders, I told them I would if they talked, and they talked, and I did it and didn't get fired, but boy, that wouldn't happen now. Who are you, girls? Stand up. Wave at the boys and girls. Come on. There you go. They're all 3 here.
We don't want to close this without warning. We want to give you a chance if you've been saving one, if you have something that you regret not telling. We've probably already told some things we'll regret, so we'd hate it to be the other way. We'd like to give you a chance.
Can I tell a story or two on you?
If you're asking me, no.
Okay, I got some good ones about Dave Shelton that we'll talk. We're going to
My
be
students are here, by the way.
during the yes.
See.
So we'll tell these during the jam session and things like that on an individual basis without his students around. But boy, they are some doozies.
Hasn't this been fun? Would you like to do it again next year? How about our 51st anniversary? Is it worth celebrating? I have a selfish request. And I didn't prepare for this, so I'm going to ask a friend of mine who has a camera. I would very much like to have my picture taken with these men, and I'd like to invite Paul Weiler. I should name names because I'm going to leave somebody out. Would all of the former directors of Franklin County, would you come up, because I would really like to get a picture with you, and then we're all going to disperse, and we invite you to go to the Plaza Hotel for an alumni big band and a jam session, and I have it on good authority that we're going to get to hear Dr. David Livingston play. I can't wait.
Yeah.
So.
You'll be sorry.
So long live the tradition of the Flyer Band, and God bless us all. We love you so much. These gentlemen are our tradition. Another hand for our panel, please.